It's strange how a videotran can sometimes highlight the most dangerous human tendencies. I think of those palm farm workers in Indonesia and how they joked with Reggie Peters about the giant snakes. He laughed it off, dismissing their warnings as old wives' tales. He wanted to see one of those big snakes up close. Today, I want to share the story of what happened to Reggie and other tales of terrifying animal encounters. Perhaps we can learn something from them. It was July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet, the air thick with humidity after the previous night's rain. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was well liked and known for his quiet diligence. He spent hours walking the farm, jotting down observations in his notebook, fascinated by the local wildlife. He'd been working there for 4 months, always taking photos of bugs, birds, and animals. The workers had noticed he never shooed away snakes or lizards. Instead, he'd kneel down, studying them. On that day, Reggie set out to inspect the water ditches before the rainy season arrived. He packed his notebook, measuring tape, and phone. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, saw him near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They teased him about the huge snakes rumoured to live in the channels. He laughed, saying he'd love to see one. They later recalled that he seemed completely unconcerned, dismissing their warnings as folklore. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles, with rows of trees divided by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy, making it treacherous in places. Dragonflies danced over the water, while mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant drone of chainsaws and the croaking of frogs. The heat hung heavy. Reticulated pythons, some of the largest snakes in the world, inhabit this area. They can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 200 pounds. They lie in wait near the water, preying on animals like pigs and dogs. Occasionally, they even attack humans. While such incidents are rare in this part of Indonesia, the snakes have been drawn closer to human activity due to the destruction of their natural habitat. Locals knew to avoid them, some carrying long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew worried and went to the last place he'd seen him. The farm was eerily silent, save for the constant buzzing of insects. Then Amir froze. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. Its midsection was grotesquely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men were watching the snake as it slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen middle part dragged heavily, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, cautiously poking at the snake from a distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth, coiling up defensively. It was massive, around 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept a close watch. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. I remember reading about a python that had swallowed a man whole. The image haunted me. A broad, uneven bulge pressing against the snake's skin, a shape too large to be a pig or dog. It's a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in places we might not expect. In that particular instance, it was Reggie, a man working on a farm, who disappeared. A search began, and one of the workers noticed the unsettling bulge in the snake. The men, horrified, watched through the night. Ultimately, the police arrived, and the python was killed with long knives and poles. The scene that followed, cutting open the snake's belly, was described as slow and disturbing. Mud and fluid mixed on the ground as Reggie's body, curled up and covered in slime, was revealed. His clothes were torn and soaked. His notebook and phone, damaged by moisture, were found near the water's edge. Afterward, the farm management put up new warning signs, advising workers not to travel alone. Reggie's cabin was cleaned out, and his belongings were shipped home to his family. But the dangers aren't always so obvious, or so large. Consider what happened on March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park in Rajasthan, India. The air was cool and quiet after a hot day. Inside a canvas tent, 2 travellers were sleeping, unaware that a snake had quietly crawled beneath the entrance. One of them was Clare Johnson, a 26-year-old graphic designer from Melbourne, Australia, who had quit her job to travel around Asia for a year. She'd saved for 2 years to make this dream a reality. Her friends knew her as adventurous, but also careful. Someone who researched her destinations, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed travel blog. Ranthambore was a place she'd longed to visit, hoping to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female tiger near a waterhole, though it was far away. She was staying at a basic but clean eco-camp outside the park gates, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she met on the train. Claire was meticulous about keeping their tent organized. Every night she shook out her shoes and made the entrance was zipped up tight. That evening, because it was cool for March, she zipped the canvas door all the way closed, leaving only a small opening for fresh air. The camp was next to dry grassland with acacia trees and tall grass. At night, insects buzzed and clicked, and they could sometimes hear peacocks. The ground was hard dirt covered with leaves and small rocks, perfect for small reptiles hunting in the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan, recognizable by the circular pattern on their hoods. They usually avoid people, but sometimes venture into human areas in search of mice, rats, or warmth. Adult cobras can grow up to 6 feet long and possess venom that can kill a person within hours without treatment. Local guides always warn campers to check their bedding and clothes, as snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. Sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke up to a soft rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, she grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled just inches from Claire's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Claire moved in her sleep and stretched out her leg. Her bare ankle touched the snake's body. The cobra bit her twice, injecting venom into the soft skin above her heel. The bites happened so quickly that Lara barely saw it until Claire gasped. Lara screamed, waking everyone in the camp. Claire sat up, clutching her ankle, where 2 small puncture wounds were visible. Camp workers rushed to the tent with flashlights and saw the snake crawling out. Clare's breathing became fast and shallow. People noticed her eyes looked strange and glassy. When she tried to stand, her legs gave way. She said her legs felt like jelly before falling back onto her sleeping mat. The camp had no anti-venom. Staff put Clare in a jeep to drive her to the hospital, with Lara pressing a scarf above the bites. The drive took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin became pale, cold, and damp. When they reached the clinic, the medical staff said there was nothing they could do. I've spent years studying how easily a moment of carelessness can lead to tragedy, especially when humans venture into the natural world. It's a theme that repeats itself in history, a somber reminder of our vulnerability. Take the story of Lara, a young German backpacker in Australia, for instance. Later that day, after the incident, her parents were contacted through the Australian embassy. They requested that her body be cremated, respecting local customs. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided not to close down, but they took a proactive step. They hired a local snake expert. This expert began giving weekly talks to all new guests, teaching them how to properly check their tents and the importance of keeping lights on at night to deter snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany. She later wrote a detailed account of her experience on a travel website. Her story served as a stark warning to other backpackers, urging them to always meticulously check their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. For years, that post was shared quietly, a serious reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without truly grasping the potential dangers. This incident underscores the critical importance of travelers taking safety precautions seriously when venturing into wilderness areas. Even experienced and cautious individuals like Clare can encounter unforeseen dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. This tragedy serves as a poignant reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Now let me tell you about something that happened on September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge Cruz was 42 years old, and he had dedicated his entire life to working in this lime orchard. Every day, before the sun even thought about rising, he'd be out there checking the water systems, pruning tree branches, and teaching his eldest son the subtle art of distinguishing between healthy and sick fruit. People in the village knew Jorge as a reliable man, the kind of neighbor who would fix broken carts and lend tools without expecting anything in return. He had this habit, ever since he was a child, of working without shoes. He always said it helped him feel the earth better and move more quickly when he needed to climb the lower branches of the trees. The afternoon was sweltering, the air heavy with humidity. The sun beat down on the leaves with such intensity that everything seemed to stand still. This orchard had been in the same family for generations, but on this particular day, the normal work routine was about to be shattered by an event that would change everything in an instant. Jorge was working alongside two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, where workers had recently piled up cut tree branches after clearing the area. The three men were joking about the oppressive heat as they moved among the low-hanging branches, carefully placing bunches of limes into bags. Jorge had his wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head, and he was wearing an old, faded shirt. As he reached for a low branch, he shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer. The ground in the orchard was hard-packed dirt, covered with fallen leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches offered cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. A patch of wild plants marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops cast long, shifting shadows across the ground. It was so quiet that even the smallest sounds, like fruit falling or clothes brushing against tree bark, were easily audible. The men were focused on their work and their conversation, perhaps not as attuned as they should have been to the potential dangers lurking nearby. There's a type of poisonous snake called the tersopilo, Brops asper, though it's locally known as the naka, that makes its home in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied and typically grow to be between 3 and 5 feet long. They possess a highly potent venom that destroys skin and muscle tissue, causes severe bleeding at the site of the bite, and can disrupt blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. These snakes are masters of camouflage, blending seamlessly with fallen leaves, and they often remain completely still until someone steps almost directly on them. A bite from one of these snakes typically results in excruciating pain, and the affected area swells rapidly. That morning, neighbors had been discussing the increased sightings of snakes, likely due to the recent rains. Jorge's wife had even urged him to wear boots while clearing brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was, in essence, a temporary haven, precisely the kind of place where snakes like to lie in wait. Raúl later recounted that he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge had dismissed their concerns, assuring them that he would work quickly. As Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck with lightning speed. It emerged from the leaves and bit him just above the ankle. Raúl and Mateo heard Jorge let out a sharp cry of pain and saw him recoil, clutching at the wound. Before they could react, the snake struck again. Dark blood began to stain the dirt where his foot had been. The pain hit Jorge instantly, and it was intense. He doubled over, dropping the fruit he was holding. Within minutes, his lower leg began to swell, and the skin started to become bruised and discolored. He began to vomit and sweat profusely, and his face turned pale. Raúl quickly tied a piece of cloth tightly above the bite marks, and they fashioned a makeshift splint from a broom handle to keep Jorge's legs still. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they carefully lifted Jorge into it, then began pushing the cart toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The journey to the clinic was slow and agonizingly bumpy. Dust settled on Jorge's damp skin, and he became increasingly confused, his speech fragmented and incoherent, drifting in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse examined his swollen leg and noted that his pulse was weak and his blood pressure was dangerously low. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but it lacked the one thing Jorge desperately needed: anti-venom, the specialized medicine required to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to contact the regional health center, pleading for assistance, but the nearest supply of anti-venom and a properly equipped ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition continued to deteriorate. He became increasingly disoriented, and his breathing grew shallow and laboured. Despite their best efforts to stem the bleeding and assist his breathing, the medical staff were unable to reverse his decline. By evening, Jorge had tragically passed away at the clinic. Raúl later shared that they had attempted to kill the snake, but it had vanished into the dense plant life. I've held notebooks stained by tragedy, felt the weight of stories etched in objects left behind. Jorge's flip phone returned to his family, spoke volumes in its silence. After the incident, a travelling veterinarian arrived, a beacon of hope in the aftermath. He carried anti-venom, knowledge, and a willingness to share. He taught the villagers how to fashion splints, apply press bandages, and understand the delicate balance of when to use a tourniquet. The villagers marked the brush pile, a stark reminder. Jorge's wife began wearing his hat, a silent echo during the harvest. And, with each harvest, a moment of solemn reflection, a promise of vigilance. It was May 2nd, 2018. I remember the air that day over the Cross River, heavy, still, pregnant with unspoken warnings. Mina Belligan, just 19, had returned from university a week prior, drawn to the river's embrace. She was known for her spirit, her laughter echoing across the water as she swam with her cousins. The elders warned of snakes, more active in the dry season, but Mina, confident in the river's familiarity, dismissed their concerns. On that day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her, unaware of the silent predator lurking beneath the surface. There are moments in history where a single choice, a single oversight, can cascade into tragedy. I've spent years tracing these threads, these critical points, where fate seems to hang in the balance. The story of Sammy, a seasoned snake handler, is one such instance. Sammy was a steady presence, a man of practical experience who preferred showing new volunteers the ropes rather than just talking about it. He truly believed that experience could reduce the danger inherent in their work. Locals trusted him because he rarely rushed and corrected sloppy technique with a gentle hand. But this particular year, the festival had drawn larger crowds, and the schedule was tighter than usual. Sammy had been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions and spending long hours in the sun. He'd even skipped a full breakfast to keep the demonstrations running smoothly, and he was feeling the weight of it all. He attributed it to the heat and exhaustion. His co-workers urged him to rest and drink water, and he agreed, but he kept working. When someone asked him to do one more live demonstration that afternoon, he couldn't refuse. He saw it as his responsibility. The roundup used shallow pits to display the snakes, surrounded by temporary barriers and a raised platform for the announcer. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water containers were nearby, but the layout was cramped, leaving volunteers exposed to the sun. Spectators leaned against the fence, phones raised, recording every movement. The setup, designed for clear viewing, reduced the space for handlers and limited opportunities for cooling down for both people and animals. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent, pit vipers, typically 4 to 5 feet long, were the stars of this show. Their venom, causing tissue damage and bleeding, could trigger shock if a large dose was delivered. These snakes could strike with surprising reach, and under stress, they might twist unexpectedly, altering a handler's grip and exposing unprotected skin. Even the most skilled handlers were vulnerable when a snake was already agitated, or when heat and repeated handling increased its stress. Earlier that day, organisers had warned volunteers to take turns and limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A minor incident that morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and drink water. Medical personnel stood by with IV fluids and anti-venom, ready to respond. Sammy heard the instructions and agreed with them. But the lure of the crowd and the demands of the schedule drew him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague and stepped into the pit, wearing a leather glove and carrying a snake hook. With a practiced motion, he lifted the snake. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, calmed by Sammy's steady presence. But then the snake's body shifted under stress, twisting sharply. It lunged, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled that he was, but his face flushed red, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he finally asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling reached his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers rushed him to the first aid tent when it became clear he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied press to slow the venom spread, started IV fluids, and administered the first vials of antivenom. His breathing grew more shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite the rapid response, his blood pressure plummeted and his pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic attempts to keep him conscious, as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over showmanship. The festival board documented the incident and created a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling times, required breaks, and a swift evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours. Occasionally, he would groom blood from his hands. It was a scene discovered the following morning by local villagers, when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. I've read countless reports, but the details of Erica's death always stay with me. The sheer force, the brutal efficiency. It's a stark reminder of the power we're dealing with when we try to domesticate the wild. Authorities in Cameroon launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation. Wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident ignited a renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers they pose to both themselves and local communities. Within days, government agents seized all the remaining animals from the property. Erica's family released a statement, expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It reminds me of another case, this one unfolding on July 22nd, 2017. It was along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. This remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, became the destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife, Sarah, and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to a secluded spot just 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck. Inside was their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. This construction worker's overconfident personality had led him to believe that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbours it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators, perfectly designed for stealth hunting. Their powerful hind legs can propel their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, these are not creatures to be trifled with. It's a difficult thing to truly tame a wild animal. Even when raised in captivity, cougars, for example, hold on to their primal instincts. I've read that their hunting behaviours become even more intense when they're in unfamiliar places, where their sense of territory kicks in. I recall a tragic case where a man named Landon made a fatal error. He released Scout, a 3-year-old cougar, from its transport crate, thinking he could let the animal stretch and explore. He really believed that Scout's upbringing had somehow softened the cougar's inherent wildness, that he could treat this predator like a house cat. As his family was setting up their fishing gear, Scout emerged from confinement. The cougar immediately started surveying this new territory. Its tawny coat blended perfectly with the brush, those yellow eyes methodically scanning, cataloguing every sound, every movement. The cougar, weighing in at 140 pounds, had its predatory instincts fully engaged when Landon walked toward the river to fill the water containers. Scout's pupils dilated. The cougar crouched low behind a fallen log, muscles coiling. Then that telltale twitch of the tail, the hunting pattern as it calculated distance and timing. In complete silence, Scout launched itself through the air, covering 20 feet in a single, explosive leap. The cougar struck Landon squarely in the back. Those 4-inch claws sank deep into Landon's shoulders, designed to grip prey and prevent any escape. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with what I can only describe as surgical precision. Those canine teeth, evolved for this very purpose, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. Landon was immediately paralyzed from the neck down. Submerged, unable to move, he drowned in about 90 seconds. Scout maintained its grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming, ensuring the prey was completely subdued. The cougar then dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching the kill away from potential scavengers. Landon's wife, Sarah, grabbed their children, Emma and Jake, and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They remained there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers finally arrived. Authorities launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident, as you can imagine, reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose. I think of another case, this one unfolding on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. It was a remote 50-acre estate, miles from any neighbors, perfect for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. This 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility with reinforced enclose and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician. Lisa had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality, his desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols, had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on these exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable, spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed that their bond, forged from her cubhood, would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting. Luna had refused all food for 4 days, even her favorite cuts of meat. She'd begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls, a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure. Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors, living miles away, reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside at night. Jaguars, I should mention, are the 3rd largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species. They can crush turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of prise per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them incredibly efficient predators. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30x40 foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest. I've seen autopsy reports and crime scene photos that still haunt me. The kind that remind you of the raw power of nature, even in our own backyards. Take the story of Marcus, for instance. One moment he was tending to Luna, a jaguar he kept in Texas. The next, he was on the floor, her jaws locked around his throat. Her bite force, they estimated, was 1,500 pounds per square inch. That crushed his windpipe instantly and severed both carotid arteries. He lost consciousness in seconds. Luna held her grip for 3 full minutes, ensuring her prey was completely subdued. Lisa discovered the scene the next morning. Luna sat calmly, grooming blood from her paws and face. Marcus's body lay partially consumed. It sparked renewed calls for stricter regulations on exotic animal ownership. His family even released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping wild predators. Then there's Brianna Ellis. June 14th, 2018, in a suburban neighborhood of Homestead, Florida. Manicured lawns, palm trees, and behind a modest rental house, an elaborate backyard pond system. It had become home to Brutus, a 9-foot American alligator. Brianna, a 26-year-old marine biology graduate student, was using the pond for her thesis research on reptilian behavior patterns. She shared the property with her friends, Kevin and Amanda. 2 years earlier, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction. She believed she could safely study him while providing proper care. But the warning signs were escalating. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times. Neighbors complained about strange splashing sounds. Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. You see, American alligators are among the most efficient predators on Earth. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began setting. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond and insisted on entering the water herself to retrieve it, despite Kevin's suggestions to use a pool net. Dusk, of course, is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, Brutus began his approach. The 350-pound alligator moved through the water with incredible precision. Brianna bent down to retrieve her equipment, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The attack came with devastating force and lightning speed. Brutus launched himself upward and forward, his massive jaws opening wide. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, crushing her femur bone instantly. Brianna's screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The alligator spun his body rapidly, tearing Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. Before she could escape, Brutus released the severed limb and attacked again. There are moments when I reflect on the unpredictable power of nature, its indifference to our human rules, and I find myself chilled. Consider the story of Brutus, an alligator who, in 2016, dragged a woman named Brianna to her death in a pond. The thrashing continued for almost 2 minutes as Brutus performed his drowning technique, and the dive team only recovered scattered remains. It was October 3, 2016, in the remote wilderness of the Adirondack Mountains. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin sat nestled among the dense forest. This isolated retreat was the home of Shah Gallagher, a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator. Sean's career had ended in disgrace 3 years earlier, and the bitter, increasingly paranoid man had retreated to this inherited family property. He'd lost his rehabilitation license following a previous bear incident that left him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his remote sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He had illegally acquired the animal as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming to rescue it from certain death in the wild. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior to state-approved programs had driven him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a makeshift arrangement that had grown increasingly inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries from recent weeks revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions and his deteriorating mental state from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating dramatically over the past month. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture and clawing deep gouges in the wooden walls. The bear had become increasingly aggressive when Sean attempted to limit his food portions, displaying territorial behavior that should have served as a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of door and window strength, repeatedly pushing against barriers as if calculating escape routes. American black bears are deceptively powerful predators, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 mph and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. Their powerful jaws can exert over 800 pounds of pres per square inch, easily capable of crushing human skulls, while their 4-inch claws are designed for climbing and digging, but prove devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal creatures, most active during twilight and nighttime hours when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15x20 foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed by the bear's ongoing rampage. He stepped quietly into the room carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that made black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness during these early morning hours, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed by nature for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, his claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the prez, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an investigation. I've often wondered about the line between trust and danger, respect and control. It's a line that seems so clear until it vanishes completely. There was a case back in 2015, near Houston, Texas, that stuck with me. It involved a man, a Bengal tiger, and a tragic miscalculation. The investigation started with a black bear found in illegal possession, but that's not the story I want to tell. This was about Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, a man who preferred the company of engines and animals to people. He lived alone, tinkering with old cars and caring for his collection of exotic creatures. It began with pythons and iguanas, then a serval. Eventually, he acquired Raja, a 6-year-old Bengal tiger, from a breeder near San Antonio. He kept Raja in a large enclosure on his property, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbors sometimes saw him walking with the tiger on a chain lead, talking to it like a friend. Michael believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone, that the animal would never hurt him. When asked about the risk, he'd say it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. One overcast afternoon, a friend named Luis Alvarez stopped by. The air was heavy. The enclose smelled of straw and damp soil. Raja was pacing restlessly, tail flicking, eyes following every movement. Construction noise echoed from a nearby property, a sound Michael said the tiger disliked. He went inside to clean, leaving the outer gate partially open for convenience. Luis watched as Raja continued to pace, muscles tensing. Michael glanced up, muttered something, and bent to his work. Luis later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze. Its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact was a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him down. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl toward the gate. Raja followed, clamping its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclose. Luis shouted, threw a wrench that clattered uselessly against the fencing. Michael swung a shovel, striking Raja's snout, but the tiger's jaws only tightened. Luis grabbed gravel, hurled it, screaming for the tiger to stop. Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. When deputies arrived, they waited for animal control. But when Raja charged the fencing, an officer fired his rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, his face unrecognizable. Investigators noted the lack of a secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Michael's funeral was quiet, attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbors left flowers at the fence, the straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. Then there was Amir Feroz in Surabaya, Indonesia. It was January the 14th, 2016. Behind a low row of warehouses, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. I find myself thinking about the Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long, weighing nearly 140 pounds. It was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center, its origins traced back to illegal trade networks from Rinca Island. I read a story once about a man named Amir. He worked at a warehouse in Indonesia and kept a Komodo dragon. He'd raised it from a juvenile, feeding it chicken and goat meat. He was proud of the animal's trust in him. He truly believed it knew him. The dragon's enclosure, though, was originally designed for a creature half its size. The morning of the incident was still and overcast, the air thick with the smell of diesel. Ahmad had skipped feeding the dragon the previous evening. He found the water basin overturned and filthy. He wanted to clean it before the day began. As he entered the enclosure, the gate creaked. The dragon was in the far corner, motionless. I know that Komodo dragons can grow to 10 feet. Their bite is strong enough to crush bone, and their venom contains toxins that cause rapid blood loss. They're ambush predators, capable of surprising bursts of speed. In captivity, they can become defensive if underfed. Another worker, Yudi, heard a clang of metal and a low thud, followed by a sharp cry. He ran toward the back, and saw Ahmad fall. The dragon had latched onto Ahmad's right calf, its teeth sunk deep. Ahmad kicked out, yelling for help. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, tearing loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping. Ahmad tried to crawl backward, leaving a smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side below the ribs, its teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream broke into a rasp. Yudi struck again until the creature backed off. Ahmad slumped onto his back. One hand pressed against the wound. The concrete was dark red, the air thick with the smell of iron. Yudi ran to the gate, dragging a burlap sack. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on the movement. The animal lunged, and Yudi managed to pull the gate shut. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. The reports confirmed multiple deep lacerations and significant internal bleeding. The cause of death was massive blood loss and shock from the venom. Veterinarians said the dragon had shown signs of food aggression, triggered by sudden movements during feeding. Police secured the warehouse and contacted the conservation agency. The story barely made the local newspapers. Neighbors remembered Ahmad as generous, but within the warehouse community, it became a quiet warning. They said he treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. Then there's the story of Mark Jennings, May 30th, 2014, near Bozeman, Montana. The morning was clear and still. Inside his animal sanctuary, one enclosure stood larger than the rest. Its occupant, a bear, paced in slow circles. Mark Jennings was 49, a former wildlife handler. He'd left the film industry to start the sanctuary. His pride was a 1,000-pound brown bear named Bruno, raised from a cub. To Mark, Bruno represented proof that wild animals could bond with humans through trust. Bruno had been with him for nearly 12 years. I've always been drawn to the moment when the wild and the familiar collide, often with tragic consequences. I remember reading once about a sanctuary, nestled on rolling pasture, bordered by pines, where an attack occurred. Early summer meant strong sunlight there and restless animals. The air, they said, carried the smell of hay and meat. That morning at the sanctuary, the enclosures were quiet, save for the pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron, one of the caretakers, arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark, the other caretaker, had left the previous evening to visit his sister. He reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, Mark texted Aaron around 10 a.m., but received no reply. Assuming she was busy, he began his drive back. Just after noon, pulling into the gravel lot, he noticed the outer gate to Bruno's enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Erin was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical. Broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently, then adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclos. The entire attack lasted under 30 seconds. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. There was another incident I recall reading about. This one took place on August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp, and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, a large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and, though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johann insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker. Peter LaRue noticed the behaviour early and told Johann that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johann brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johann took a broom and bucket toward the enclosure, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've always been struck by how quickly a seemingly normal situation can turn irreversible, especially when wild animals are involved. It's a thought that keeps me up some nights. October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama, started like any other day. Birds moved between the trees along the edge of the Reeves property. Behind a modest brick house, 2 large cages stood under a weathered tin awning, their bars streaked with rust. Inside, 2 chimpanzees made sharp, uneven calls. Within the hour, a small routine would turn into something violent. Linda Reeves was 58, a retired lab technician. Her co-workers remembered her as disciplined and precise, with a fascination for animals that bordered on obsession. After retiring early, she poured her savings into building an enclosure for 2 young chimpanzees she had adopted from a private exotic pet dealer. She named them Buddy and Rosie, a male and female she'd raised since infancy. To Linda, they were family. She fed them breakfast cereal, dressed them in children's clothes, and sometimes let them sit in the living room to watch television through the screen door. Her brother, Tom Reeves, visited weekly. He loved her, but worried constantly. The chimps, once under 70 lb, had grown fast. Buddy now weighed over 130, his arms thick and muscular, while Rosie was nearing 100. Chimpanzees are strong beyond proportion, 5 times the upper body strength of an adult man. Males can weigh over 150 lb. Their jaws are capable of shattering bone with a bite force near 1,200 lb per square inch. In the wild, they display bursts of extreme aggression when agitated or competing for dominance, targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their opponents. Captivity often amplifies these instincts, especially when confinement or frustration builds. Tom had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset, and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. It was routine now: feed, clean, groom, and talk to them like children. That Sunday morning, the routine would unravel. On that day, Linda carried a plastic bowl filled with banana slices and apples into the enclosure. Tom stood by the porch, watching her through the screen. Buddy screeched as she entered, bouncing on his knuckles while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a flat rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. The sound he made next, a deep, chesty pan hoot, was different from his usual play noise. Tom saw the shift immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward onto the concrete. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down from the bars. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, one hand on her shoulder, the other tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and froze for a second before fumbling for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting into the phone for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled under the blows, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still think about the bare patch of concrete, stained faintly dark where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can turn. It was April 17th, 2015. A bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small private animal park. I picture the scene. A roadside zoo, the kind with fading paint and rust showing through the fences. Families with strollers mixed with school groups, teachers trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow, algae-lined moat. A hand-painted sign warned, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the enclosure looked outdated compared to what you'd see at a modern, accredited zoo. Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old 6th grader, was there on a spring field trip. His mum worked nights as a nurse, and his dad operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. He was bright but impulsive, the kind of boy who climbed trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. He had a second-hand digital camera he'd saved up for, and his plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance. A few classmates noticed and told him to stop, but he ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. Teachers screamed his name. Some kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling, deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclave heard the commotion and ran toward the enclave, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. I've seen the aftermath of these attacks, the way a single moment can shatter everything we think we understand about the natural world. The story of Belinda Holmes and her chimpanzee, Charlie, is one that always comes back to me. It serves as a stark reminder that no matter how much we try to domesticate the wild, some instincts remain dormant, waiting for the opportune moment to resurface. On June 11th, 2014, the afternoon in Stamford, Connecticut, was quiet, marked only by the sounds of lawnmowers and passing cars. Houses lined Rockledge Drive, each with its trimmed lawn and small front porch. But inside one of these homes, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but what lived inside made it different from every other home on the block. Belinda Holmes was 57 years old and had lived in Stamford most of her life. She worked part-time at an insurance office, but was better known to neighbors for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. Belinda had gotten Charlie as an infant years earlier, ignoring state laws that banned private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him and believed she could control him the way others controlled pets. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows. Neighbors watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle and misunderstood. The house showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On this June day, the weather was warm and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household had not removed Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings before. Months earlier, a neighbor called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbors heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbors running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbors backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma center with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbors gathered outside. I recall another incident some years earlier. Matthew, a staff member at an animal park, was found motionless after an incident with a chimpanzee. The animal, agitated, retreated toward the back wall, hooting loudly. Staff rushed in, and Matthew was found face up with shallow breaths. His right arm was badly lacerated with deep puncture wounds. There were facial injuries and a bite near his cheekbone. He went into cardiac arrest before reaching the hospital and was pronounced dead on arrival due to blood loss and trauma. An investigation revealed that the encolo didn't meet state standards, and the park lacked a formal emergency response team. I've read accounts of animal attacks that have stayed with me for years. But the story of Belinda, and the trauma inflicted on her, is especially haunting. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. Belinda survived, but her life was irrevocably altered. Multiple surgeries couldn't erase the disfigurement, the need for constant care. The case, as you might imagine, ignited a national debate about the profound dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Connecticut lawmakers responded, enacting stricter regulations and outright banning private chimpanzee ownership. Even the house, eventually sold, carried the weight of its history, the new owners forever aware of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. It was May 28, 2017. Memorial Day weekend, on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, along a quiet bend of the Colorado River. Several families had gathered for a barbecue at a privately rented picnic site. A seemingly idyllic scene. A patch of grass bordered by live oaks and the open water. Cars lined the dirt access road, children played near the grills, and the afternoon heat shimmered off the river. But one guest had brought an animal most people only ever see safely behind thick glass. The victim that day was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He lived nearby and often ran the trails, meeting friends for cookouts on clear days. He was known for his reliability, always prepared with extra water and sunscreen. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile run and stopped by the barbecue after a friend's text. He saw the small crowd near the tables and, curious, walked over. Daniel wasn't someone who shied away from animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping to calm anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance from the animal, staying behind a low trash can, giving it space. The chimpanzee wore a harness, and its owner was chatting with onlookers, offering small pieces of fruit. Daniel simply wanted a clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he'd witnessed on an otherwise normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet, angling his phone for a clear shot past the small crowd. The scene appeared ordinary. The chimpanzee shifted constantly, pacing in a small circle on its leash, sniffing the air, reaching for anything held too close. A thin, musky scent drifted on the breeze, mixing with the charcoal smoke from the nearby grills. But adult male chimpanzees are not meant for public gatherings. In their social groups, dominance is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't completely erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and the competition for food can trigger them in an instant. A city ordinance prohibited exotic animals within Austin's limits, but this picnic site lay just beyond that oversight. Few at the event realized the handler lacked the necessary permits. A couple near the front stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash, but continued to feed it pieces of fruit. A runner passing by called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle, hoping to get one steady shot. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, its eyes fixed on the moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a brief moment, everything froze except the wind. Then, the lunge. It covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite struck his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free, but the chimp's grip held firm. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams erupted from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get to his feet, but the chimp climbed onto his torso, hammering his shoulder with its fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the ensuing scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed, one after another. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung an arm without looking, knocking him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. The wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel with each bite. A woman dragged 2 children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, his hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released its grip, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally weakening. Daniel's movements grew feeble. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing seemed to work. Emergency calls went out within seconds, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that had echoed there. I've always found it unsettling how easily things can go wrong, despite years of training and preparation. September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles, California, began like any other day at a small independent production studio. The morning sun streamed across the lot, illuminating a staged living room set. The plan was simple: a segment for a daytime talk show featuring a chimpanzee. But beneath the surface of routine, a storm was brewing. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old exotic animal trainer, had dedicated 2 decades to this work. His approach was built on patience, teaching wild animals to tolerate human environments. This particular job seemed like just another paycheck, another chance to promote his business. Mike, the 13-year-old chimp, had been with Kevin since infancy. But even with familiarity, adulthood can change everything, especially for a chimp. The set was modest: a sofa, a coffee table, a backdrop beneath hot studio lamps. Mike, wearing only a light collar and leash, sat beside Kevin, constantly shifting, tugging at the strap, his eyes darting across the unfamiliar faces. An animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing signs of stress, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director, pressed for time, insisted they proceed. Kevin re-azzed everyone, offering Mike small pieces of banana to calm him. For a moment, it seemed to work. As recording began, the room brightened. The host smiled, reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. But then, the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged. I've always been drawn to the edges, where the wild world presses against our own. But sometimes those boundaries can be razor-thin, fraught with peril. A stark example of this occurred on a highway cutting through the green ridges of a forest. A photographer named Martin, driven by the pursuit of unique images, found himself face to face with the raw power of nature. He'd hoped to photograph chimpanzees appearing at roadside clearings, perhaps against the backdrop of the mountain road. He had experience photographing gorillas and monkeys, but that drive for unique images sometimes pushed him close to risk. He parked in a gravel turnout near a bend, slung his camera over his shoulder, and began walking along the shoulder. A passing motorbike rider shouted at him in the local language, gesturing toward the trees. But Martin only waved back and kept moving. To him, the danger seemed less about animals and more about trucks speeding around blind corners. The highway cut sharply through green ridges, with walls of vegetation pressing close to the road. Traffic passed in bursts, leaving long stretches of silence except for the forest's background noise. On one side, a red dirt slope rose nearly 20 feet, with vines draping down. On the other, trees leaned low over a drop into dense undergrowth. It was along these margins that chimpanzees sometimes appeared. They could climb easily across embankments or descend into the ditches that lined the road. In their shrinking habitat, the edge of the asphalt became another boundary to patrol. When startled or challenged, aggression was their first response. Rangers at the visitor centre often told tourists to stay inside vehicles when driving the forest roads. Truck drivers reported occasional sightings of chimps near bends, where fruit trees grew close to the highway. Locals avoided walking alone along that stretch, especially in the morning when animals were most active. Martin had been told as much at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed it, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas under stricter conditions. A few minutes into his walk, Martin saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge of the slope. Behind him, two smaller chimps lingered in the plants. Martin raised his camera, crouching low at the shoulder for a clear angle. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The two younger chimps retreated into cover, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in for a close shot. He stepped forward into the lane, unaware that the chimp had begun to climb down toward him. The descent took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the gap on all fours. Martin lowered the camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging with sudden speed. The first impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding across the pavement. The chimp seized his left arm and dragged him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace with his feet, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite clamped onto his forearm, tearing skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting as he watched. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled quickly on the gravel shoulder, running into the ditch. The younger chimps appeared briefly from the tree line, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones from the roadside, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll weakly onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw, the rasp of Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel as the struggle shifted back and forth. The assault lasted only a few minutes, though to the witnesses it felt far longer before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and Martin was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep press on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fateful, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.